Good morning and welcome to Mission City Church. We are so glad you are worshiping with us online this morning. My name is Melissa and I am the Connections Director here at Mission City. I have the pleasure to help people get connected here. In just a moment, you can pull out your phone and a QR code will pop up on your screen. You can scan it and it will take you to our website. That is where you can fill out a Connect card, and that is how we just connect with you, know how we can serve you better. You can put prayer requests there. If you have any questions, anything you need, we're here to serve you, and that helps us do that. You can also give on our website, and there is a link to that there, and you can just put in whatever amount, and that would be greatly appreciated. So now it is our prayer for you this morning, no matter where you're at, that you may have an encounter with Jesus. He can meet you wherever you are and in the midst of whatever you're going through. Let's worship together.
Sometimes on this journey, I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over, yeah, my story's just begun. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Oh, failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Ooh, oh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Arrival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. You never want it perfect, you just want it right. And the story isn't over, the story isn't good. Failure's never final, and the Father's in the room. Come on. 'Cause failure's never final, and the Father's in the room. Ooh, oh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. This next part gets a little exciting, talking about prodigals coming home, the hopeless finding hope. Let's sing this out. Prodigals come home. Prodigals come home, the helpless find hope. Oh, love is on the move, oh, and the Father's in the room. The prison doors fling wide, the death come to life. Oh, love is on the move, oh, and the Father's in the room. Yeah. 'Cause miracles take place, the cynical find faith. Oh, love is breaking through, and the Father's in the room. Oh, 'cause Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Oh, love is breaking through, and the Father's in the room. Oh, 'cause love is breaking through, oh, and the Father's in the room. Oh, lay your burdens down. Here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house. Ooh, oh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, oh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. darkest, but your light is greater. You light our way, God, you light our way. Evil is rising, you're rising higher, with power to save, with power to save. You keep hope alive. Oh, you keep hope alive from the beginning to end. Your word never fails, 'cause you keep hope alive, because you are alive. Jesus, you are alive. Death had a stronghold, but your life was stronger. Rose from the grave, rose up from the grave. When evil is rising, you're rising higher. Power to save, with power to save. You keep hope, oh, 'cause you keep hope alive. Oh, you keep hope alive from the beginning to end. Your word never fails, and you keep hope alive. Oh, with you are alive. Oh, Jesus, you are alive. Oh, 'cause there's hope in the morning, there's hope. Oh, in the evening, there's hope. Because you live in my hope. Because you're breathing, there's hope. Oh, in the breaking, there's hope. In the sorrow, hope. For this moment, my hope. For tomorrow, there is hope. In the morning, there is hope. Oh, in the evening, there is hope. Because you live in my hope. Because you're breathing, there's hope. Oh, in the breaking, hope. In the sorrow, you're my hope. And for this moment, my hope. And for tomorrow, 'cause you keep hope alive. Oh, you keep hope alive from the beginning to end. Your word never fails, and you keep hope alive. Oh, because you are alive. Oh, Jesus, you are alive. Keep hope alive, because you are alive from the beginning to end. Your word never fails, and you keep hope alive, because you are alive. Jesus, you are alive.
Hey, what's up, Mission City Church? I'm so excited to be with you guys to bring you this message. We're continuing in our series over the book of Luke. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, my name is Jake, and I have the pleasure of leading the groups ministry here for Mission City Church. And it's just been awesome to be a part of what God's doing here in this church and through the Kansas City area and outside the Kansas City area. Maybe, wherever you're listening or watching this message from, we're super glad that you're joining us. And I'm excited to bring this message to you. And before we get into that, I just want to kind of recap a little bit of what Russell talked about last week, because that'll be helpful for us as we kind of dive into this morning's content. So Russell last week broke down a little bit in how we should read these things called parables, or these stories that are intended to have a moral or theological, spiritual truth to them. And Jesus would use these a lot to help teach or bring light to certain parts of his message, the ideas that he wanted to share with the world at this time. And he would use these messages in very strategic ways to enable some people to get the meaning and some people not so much. But it's important for us to read these properly and to see them in the light that they were meant to be said. And so the way Russell kind of broke it down, I really appreciated this, was to look at it in 4 ways. Number 1 is context. We want to look at the audience, what's going on in the time period, or what's happening while Jesus is saying the story that he's saying. We want to look at the characters. Who is Jesus talking about? Who are these fictional or maybe non-fictional people that are involved in these stories. We also want to look at the meaning. What is Jesus trying to say with this? And finally, the significance. So if that's what he means, what does that mean to the individuals he's speaking to the time period that they're in? How is it significant to their lives? And so we're going to look at the parables in Luke chapter 15. There's 3 of them. We're going to look at them through that lens, through those 4 categories that we should be kind of dissecting these parables in. And before we get there, I want to just borrow a page from the great theologian Shrek and let you know that these parables are kind of like an onion, and that they have layers, but they're all have the same meaning to them, right? So we're going to kind of peel back the first 2 layers. They're a little bit less significant, same meaning and everything to them, but there's less to them, and just kind of look at them briefly, and then we're going to really spend most of our time in the 3rd parable. So these first 2 parables, we're looking at a story of like a lost sheep. So there's a shepherd. There's 100 sheep that he's watching over. One of them gets lost. There's still 99 left, but one of them gets lost, and he goes and he finds it, he brings it back, and then he celebrates with a party. In the second story that Jesus tells, there's this woman who's lost a coin. She has 10 total. She's lost 1. She has 9 left. And then she finds the coin. She sweeps the entire house, finds it, and then she throws a party to celebrate. And in this final story, we see that there is a son who is lost, and then he's found, and then a party is thrown. So there's kind of this, you can see this pattern begin to develop, and it's very similar, and there's a very similar meaning to it, but not just like similar, but like Jesus actually doubles down or like intensifies the story every time. So we look at like the first story where there's 99 or 100 sheep, and you still have 99. Like, you're doing all right. If you score a 99 on a test, that's still pretty good, right? So, but you're going to go after the one, or the shepherd in the story goes after the one, he finds it, he celebrates. Now, if you had 10 coins, or say maybe your entire life savings and you lost 10% of it, you lost 1 coin of your 10, that's still a pretty big deal. 10% of your life savings, various, depending on who you are, might be a lot of money, might be a little money, but it's probably something that you can overcome eventually, right? Just like 10%, but then Jesus goes as far as to throw like human being, and not just one human being, but like a 1 of 2, like 50% of the sons are going to be lost here. And so there's like this developing plot that thickens every story that Jesus tells, and he just kind of doubles down and gets more intense. And then also, just want to kind of a teaser here, not only is the son lost, but actually in the scripture, in the passage, he'll say, the father in the story will say, my son was dead, and now he's alive. Like, not only are we doubling down, are we getting more intense with the pieces in the story, but also what is being said, the message that is trying to be given in these stories. So we're going to look at, again, we're going to focus on the last one, but we're going to start with context. Number 1, the first section of our breakdown of our 4 categories, we want to look at the context, make sure that we're reading this parable in light of who Jesus was saying it to and what it might have actually meant. So I want to just do an exercise with me here. So I'm going to have you close your eyes wherever you're at. You're probably sitting, or maybe you're at a coffee shop or in your house or apartment or wherever you're at, but you close your eyes and picture yourself in like a classroom setting or in a group of people. You're in a crowd and you're listening to someone teach. And so this is going to be Jesus kind of telling these stories. You're going to picture yourself in this crowd of people. And I'm going to kind of break down a little bit based off the first 2 verses of Luke 15, who might be in this crowd with you. So picture this with me. So it says in verse 1 and 2 of chapter 15 in Luke. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So as you've got your eyes closed, you're picturing the scene. You've got tax collectors, however you picture them to be. Sinners, however you picture them to be, are getting close. They're the front row seats. They're drawing close to Jesus. And then you've got these Pharisees, these religious leaders, these scribes kind of in the background that are just arms folded, grumbling, complaining about the crowd that gets the front row seats. Because in their mind, if this is like a religious person, if Jesus is who he says he is, they should probably be in the front row, right? They should have those seats. They should be close to him. And not only should they be there, but these sinners, these tax collectors, shouldn't even be able to have a meal with them. They shouldn't be in the same socioeconomic realm. They're not even in the same stratosphere as who Jesus is. They should be, despising him. He should despise them. They shouldn't count. And yet they're the ones that are drawing near to him, and Jesus is welcoming them around him. Now, it's super important that we start out with just breaking down these two groups of people, because this is going to set the stage for why this parable is so interesting and relevant and has such significance to know, if we know who is actually watching and listening. So let's start out with these sinners and tax collectors, right? So you might have pictured an IRS agent as a tax collector, and maybe like a sinner like your college buddy, right? Like that person that is they've gone a little bit sideways, or they maybe for whatever reason, that's maybe who you pictured, or maybe you had a certain person in mind. Maybe you just had kind of a random generic image in mind. But really, if we're talking about tax collectors and sinners in the context of this story, what we're talking about is the worst of the worst from a moral standpoint in society. So check this out. So a tax collector is not just someone who comes and is hey, you owe your 10%, you owe your 15%, this is your tax bracket, this is how much you owe, we're going to collect, and you might get a refund at the end if you give too much. It's not like that at all. In fact, what it is they would actually probably charge you more and then keep that on top for themselves, one. Two, there's such a thing as this Roman government who has conquered everything in the realm, and these Pharisees, their heritage has been stripped away from them because Rome has come in and conquered over the land and said, hey, you know what, you can keep your land, but we're going to tax you so heavily that you're not even going to be able to afford to do so, and then you're going to have to sell it to us super cheap, and then we're going to continue to tax you on it. That's where they're at. And then they're going to hire these tax collectors who are also of the same heritage of the Pharisees, but have chosen to jump onto Rome's side and to collect taxes from them. They used to be related. They used to be brothers. They used to be of the same mindset and theology and all these different things, but they've betrayed them in the Pharisees' mind to join the Roman Empire and to take from them. And so you picture this, now you're seeing these Pharisees, okay, so they kind of have a reason to be angry at these tax collectors, right? I can imagine having everything stripped from you, and your friend or your neighbor across the street is now enforcing the laws that strip that from you. There'd be an anger, a frustration, maybe even a hatred towards them. Now, we're going to, the other group of people here, sinners. Okay, so this isn't just what we might think of we're all sinners, we're it's not like that. It's this is a specific class of people where your way of making money is morally by definition wrong. And so maybe a prostitution or something else that has literally the context of what you do to make money in it of itself is morally wrong. Most of us, I would say, are probably in a morally neutral field. It doesn't necessarily make sense for us to say that, you're a sinner because you have this job. You work at a bank. Okay, that's morally neutral. Now, there are probably ethical questions or moral opportunities in that could go right or wrong, but in general, it's pretty neutral. Now, these sinners are their way of life is actually morally wrong. That's what they're saying. And so these are the categories that you've got that are drawing near to Jesus. People that have betrayed their country and people who literally do morally wrong things for money. And Jesus is welcoming them to circle around him. Now you have the Pharisees on the other hand. These are the people that are grumbling, complaining that they're circling around him. What are they like? Well, they're like the people who are super educated. One, as a requirement of being a Pharisee, you had to memorize the first 5 books of the Bible, which includes Numbers, by the way, which is equally as interesting as the title might suggest. Okay, but they've got this memorized in all 5 books, and they're looking at this going, you know what, we know that there is a Savior that's supposed to come, and in their mindset, they're thinking, this person's going to come in and overthrow Rome and help us to establish the nation of Israel again as a world superpower, and we're going to rule over these people. So why in the world would this person come in and say that they're that Savior, and then eat and drink and celebrate and hang out with the enemy. Like, don't you realize, like, they're rooting for a rebellion, and Jesus is joining, like, hanging out with the people that they're hoping to rebel against. That's where the frustration is coming from. So I just want to get that out there because I have often come at stories like this with this idea that Pharisees are like the evil people. Like, that's the people that Jesus came to prove wrong and say, like you're wrong. Like, I'm going to welcome these other people. But it's like, if you think about it in this context, like, no, like the Pharisees actually have a point, right? Like, you picking that up with me? Like I almost like kind of understand a little bit. Now keep that in mind. Let's keep that context. You're in that crowd. That's what you're observing. Let's keep that context as we begin to talk about this final parable in Luke chapter 15. And if you've been around church, if you've watched many sermons, you've probably come across somebody else speaking about the same passage before. This is the story of the Prodigal Son. This is a story that's very famous in Christian teaching. But we're going to read it in light of these four categories, in the context, the characters, the meaning, and significance, and hopefully God has something He wants to speak to you about today. So let's jump in. So starting in verse 11. And he said, this is Jesus speaking, there was a man who had two sons. He's setting the stage for the parable and the characters that we're going to have so far. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided the property between them. Now, I just like we can read over that and go really quickly and not catch what's happening here. Like when he says, the younger son says, Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me, what he's basically saying is, can you hurry up and die already so that I can get the portion that I'm owed, that you've worked for, that you've built, that you've created, but because I'm going to be owed it eventually whenever you die, I want it now. Okay. Good sonly duty there, right? Like to come to your father and say, hey, look, I can't wait any longer for you to die. Clock's ticking here. I got to get out of here. Can you just give me everything that I'm owed and we'll just cut this off and you'll never see me again. I'll never see you again. I'm just going to head out with that and make my own life. You can imagine like the father's disappointment, the heartbreak, the devastation of being asked that from his son. Now, from the other brother, you think about this, like, this isn't just, we're not just talking about like stuff here or like, the cash in the safe in the back room. Like what we're probably talking about is land. What we're probably talking about is animals, is livestock. We're probably talking about is the entire legacy of this family name. And he's saying, no, I just want you to divide that up, give me my portion. I'm going to go sell that to the neighbor so their legacy, their name gets richer and more famous. And I'm going to take the cash that they give me for it, I'm going to head out and do my own thing. So not only is he impacting himself and breaking his father's heart, but he's also saying, hey, look, the family name, I'm probably going to put a black mark on that as well because we're going to have less land, we're going to have less animals, we're going to have less of everything because I just want to get my cash and run. That's what's happening here. A lot to unpack in just those couple verses, right? But then it goes on to say this. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Which is kind of a disgusting picture if you think about it, right? Like he is so hungry, so in need that he'd like to eat the slop of the pigs. He's begging on the street corner. No one's giving him anything. Like he's wanting to steal the food that the pigs are eating so that he has a meal. And get this. So putting ourselves back in the context here. You're standing in the crowd. The Pharisees are grumbling. Jesus is telling the story. And it begins to dawn on the Pharisees, or at least in their mind, they're thinking, hey, guess what? Jesus is finally giving it to these sinners and tax collectors. Because in their mind, they're connecting the dots here that, hey, that's the younger son. You people are the younger son. You ever had like that moment where you're sitting next to somebody in like a lecture or a lesson or maybe even a sermon? Hopefully not, but they're like kind of give you the nudge, like, hey, you paying attention here? Like, I think he's talking about you, right? Like that's what's happening here. Like the Pharisees, like you can almost, like I'm almost seeing this in my mind, like they're beginning to have a little grin, a little smirk. It's like, Jesus, like he just wanted to rope them in so he could finally just like roast them right here. Like you had the opportunity, especially you tax collectors, you Israelites who turned your back on God's people, on God's favor to go with Rome and to make a living with them. Like you are the younger son eating with the slop and the pigs. Yes, Jesus, get him. That story takes a turn. It says, when he came to himself, the younger son who's sitting with the pigs, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Think about like the broken heart of the father when he was asked to give away, to be told that his son rather him be dead so that he could receive his portion, and to see him from a long way off. And who knows how long this had been since they'd seen each other. And not to mention the fact that like it's kind of embarrassing for him. Like in the context and the culture, for an older gentleman to get up and run after, like it's a slow pace, it's a walk, we never embarrass ourselves by going anywhere too quickly. We're kind of floating as we walk. Like that kind of like stature would be like for an older man. So for him to like run out to his father, it's kind of like this embarrassing moment almost for him. But he's so overcome with joy that his son has returned. Kisses him, and he says, so the son who's practiced the speech the whole way home, I've sinned against you in heaven, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me a servant so I can just live here, please. His father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. We're going to have a party. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Now, let's just check in real quick. We got the characters here. So you got father who has had his heart broken but rejoices in his son's return. There's a party, and that's the elaboration of the previous stories. We've got younger son who left and sinned and was broken morally and spiritually, and then returns to his father and says, be a servant, but his father receives him as a son. And then there's one other character, right? Like the older brother. What's going on with him? Let's check in. Let's continue to read here. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. He was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated and begged him, pleaded with him to come into the party. But he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you and never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, nothing as you never even gave me anything. You never gave me the smallest animal to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, notice he's no longer his brother. It's his father's son now. This son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes. You killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost, and he was found. And Jesus is extending this story, this meaning that he's had, building from the last two stories. Instead of just being lost and found, now he's talking about death and life. This is crazy. This story, the meaning behind this is it goes so deep. But I just want to kind of think about this with you all for a second. So remember when we were talking about the Pharisees maybe getting a smirk, a grin on their face that the younger son was with the pigs, was broken, but Jesus then flips it, that they're actually received by the Father, that there's grace, that there's forgiveness, that a father would run and hug them, embarrassing himself to do so. And so now it's wait a second, what the heck? This is really flipped on us. Like we thought this was going our way, but what's going on? And then Jesus actually gives them a character too. He says, but you're like this older brother, and I wonder if the Pharisees started to put that together. Is he saying that's about us? Is he calling us out? Is he giving us a role in this story to be the one that's outside, that's talking about how we never do anything wrong, how we follow the commands, and yet you're receiving these sinners, and there's a party, there's a celebration, you're going to hang out with them, but we never got a party. It's not in our rules to throw parties and celebrate and do anything like that. We just have to follow the rules. Kind of seems like he's giving them that portion, but in a sense, like, aren't the Pharisees kind of justified? Aren't they kind of right? Like, aren't they kind of like you have someone in your life maybe that you're like, that person always seems to do the wrong thing and it still works out for them? Or they're clearly not a good person but yet keep having success? I'll tell you a quick story. So, we don't have a ton of time left, but I just want to share this. So this week I was struggling one night. I was scrolling through Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I can't remember which one, but I came across this story from this guy I went to high school with, and his fiance, and they purchased a house, right? And my wife and I just bought a house less than a year ago, about 6 months ago or so, maybe a little bit longer, but when it's a very stressful process. Like, we looked at all these different houses and had all this going on, and we settled on a house that we thought, was as much as we wanted to pay for a house, but also had a lot of potential to it that we could kind of invest into it. But there's no way that we could buy a nicer house. Well, this person that I went to high school with or whatever, he's a little bit younger than us, and they bought this house, and it was like a pretty nice house from what my standards are, right? And they kept calling it their project house, like their fixer-upper. And I'm thinking in my head, like, that house is nicer than anything I may ever be able to afford, and you're calling that like your fixer-upper house? And like, I'm trying to buy like this house, and look, I'm not saying that I'm justifying this, I'm not saying I'm right, but you're with me, right? Like, can you feel that? Can you get that where I'm coming from? Like that's kind of like the sense that the Pharisees have. Like, are you serious? Like, come on now. Like, really? They get accepted. They get that. It seems like they're always doing the wrong thing. They turn their back on us, and really? But here's the final two kind of categories here to break this down, to wrap up here. There's a meaning and significance to this, what Jesus is trying to say. There's a meaning here that everyone's invited to this party. And maybe you find yourself in one of two places this morning or this afternoon, whenever you're watching this, that maybe you can relate a little bit with the younger son. Maybe that's where you're at. And you're thinking, like, wow, like it's hopefully you've come to a realization at some point in your life, and maybe today, right now, is the first time that you've ever done it, that God is willing to almost, in a sense, like if we use the story as an example, to embarrass himself, to love and show you love and mercy and grace. Like, he would go so far as to choose or to allow someone who is the worst of the worst to receive grace and forgiveness, and for people to even look around and go, how in the world is that person a follower of Jesus or is forgiven or known or loved? And God's willing to say, no, you are welcome in my house. You're welcome. I'm going to throw a party for you to celebrate your return to me. Like maybe that's where you're at right now, and that's just what you need today, and I hope that you find that. I would love for that to be a recognition, a realization for you that is your story. But maybe you're also in a place where you've realized that, or it's been a while, and you find yourself more like how I was this week, looking at those around you and thinking, like, I don't think that person deserves that. I don't think that person should get that. I don't want to join in celebrating them. Maybe even I could go as far as to say, and I'm ashamed to admit this, there are people in the world that I think, if I was completely honest, I would rather God not forgive. I'd rather him not forgive them. I'd rather them, in my mind, be justified in going to darkness and gnashing of teeth and all the other things that the Bible describes as the other place that you go to, right? If you're not with God, like I would much rather, I think they deserve it, if I'm honest. I think they've earned that. And yet, like, God is willing to forgive them. And I'm the one that's suffering, standing outside of the party of heaven that's rejoicing over them being forgiven, going, wait, that person got in? that person deserves forgiveness? And God still wants to come to me and go, hey, look, come into the party. Like, we're going to celebrate the fact that your brother, who I have now said, no, that's your son. God, that's your son, that's not my brother. I've chosen to make that delineation. I've separated the fact that they're my brother, my sister. And God says, no, I'm throwing a party for them just like I threw that party for you when you came to me. By the way, fun side fact here, something that the Pharisees probably realized was that the younger son's story is a story of them. It's a story of Israel. They had the first 5 books memorized. They would have known, like, that's the story that they came from, that they left the father, that they threw it all away, that then they returned. Like, that happened. There's an understanding there that even though they're the older son, they were also the younger son at one point. And I pray that we would recognize that this morning, that God's inviting everyone into this party to celebrate the sinners coming home, the lost being saved, the dead coming to life. Guys, I love you. I'm going to pray for us to wrap us up this morning. We're going to go back into a time of worship. God, thank you so much for this morning or this afternoon or again, whenever you're listening to this. And I just pray for every person watching this video that or listening that they would recognize or be able to identify with where they're at right now. Maybe a son or an older son, a younger son. Maybe they realize that they need a moment to be more fatherly and to accept and to forgive and to come into the party that's being thrown to celebrate the one who's been lost and has returned. God, we love you. Pray that you would just encourage us this morning. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountains I could not climb. In desperation, I turned and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross is spoken, oh, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, oh, I'm yours forever. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, hallelujah, praise the Lord, sing free, hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me, oh, you have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, you're my living hope. Oh, hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me, Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body
Thanks so much for joining us this morning. After hearing Jake's sermon this morning, if someone came to your mind that you need to invite to the party, just reach out to them. And if you need help doing that, we are here for you. Please reach out to us. Or if there's any way we can be serving you better, please let us know. We hope you have a great week.